YouTube has some seriously unhinged creators. I feel like that shouldn't really be a shock to anyone. With how long YouTube has been around and how many people upload to it on a daily basis, there's bound to be a dark side. A dark side we'll be exploring today. So get ready to hear the stories behind some of the worst controversies on YouTube and the inmates still serving time in prison. And we're starting off our list with the very recent case of Ruby Franke, who ran the family vlog style YouTube channel 8 Passengers. Well, she and her business partner Jody Hildebrandt are facing 4 counts to be served consecutively, each being 1 to 15 years long, so she could be in prison for up to 60 years. And this is because she was found to have been harming her own offspring. Sorry I have to word that in such a weird way, but YouTube guidelines are pretty strict about this sort of thing. So all this stuff started coming to light when one of Ruby Franke's young ones escaped from Hildebrandt's house through a window and ran to a neighbor for help. He'd been tied up with duct tape and looked emaciated. And then, as if this wasn't already bad enough, all this other stuff started coming out about how other members of the family were tormented by Ruby and Jody. It's an incredibly unsettling story, especially because through this YouTube channel, the family had this wholesome, healthy, happy outward appearance, at least for the most part. There were hints at some odd stuff going on. In one video, Ruby says she'd withhold food as punishment, remove their beds as punishment. Kinda sus, but not criminal necessarily. But as soon as the neighbors saw her son in the state he was in, they immediately called the cops. Really goes to show that we just don't know what goes on behind closed doors sometimes. Next up, we have Trevor Daniel Jacob, who just started his 6-month prison sentence at the end of January. This case just perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with internet culture these days. It's beautiful. The things people will do for attention online is super depressing, honestly. So this guy would do videos about skydiving, aviation, and snowboarding. In November of 2021, he flew his vintage aircraft, a Taylor Craft BL-65, claiming to spread ashes in memory of a friend. And during the flight, the engine failed. Jacob parachuted to the ground, escaping with minor injuries. He later posted a video on YouTube about a month later entitled "I Crashed My Plane," which gained 1.7 million views before being taken down. The aviation community were a little suspicious about Jacob's video. It didn't show standard aviation emergency procedures, and some believed the crash was a deliberate stunt for publicity. Jacob reported the crash to the National Transportation Safety Board and the Federal Aviation Administration, but couldn't recall the crash site's location. In April of 2022, the FAA determined that Jacob intentionally abandoned the aircraft, filmed the crash. The FAA revoked his pilot certificate for 1 year. In May of 2023, Jacob pleaded guilty to a felony charge of obstructing a federal investigation, admitting he lied to investigators and intentionally crashed the plane for notoriety and financial gain. In December of 2023, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison, scheduled to begin on January 29th of 2024. Next up, we have the incredibly disturbing case of Trey Eric Sessler, aka Mr. Anime. This guy had a YouTube channel called LensCap Productions, where he mostly talked about anime, but he was also a big fan of firearms and started implementing them into his videos as well. Now, at some point, something started changing in Sessler's mind. He started becoming more and more obsessed with causing harm on a large scale. He decided he wanted to enact a Columbine level of violence. Luckily, he was arrested before he could carry out his full plan, but his own family weren't so lucky. On March 20th of 2012, a relative of the Sesslers called for a welfare check on the family when she hadn't heard from them. The police arrived at the Sesslers' home in Waller, Texas, and there was no answer at the door. They peeked through the window, spotting a body. They kicked down the door, finding the remains of the entire family, all except for Mr. Anime. He was arrested and eventually pled guilty, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Alright, so this next one is a bit different than the others on this list. Instead of YouTubers turned inmates, These are inmates turned YouTubers, or at least getting some recognition on social media. So there's this interesting trend going on in prisons in the UK primarily, where inmates are somehow getting their hands on phones and then filming videos from within the prison. And some of them have been getting pretty big on social media. Prison talk has become a pretty popular tag on TikTok, and there are YouTube channels full of inmates interviewing other inmates about their crimes, their daily life inside the prison. One interview features a guy named Thomas Fraser serving 21 years in the slammer for lighting someone on fire and blinding a guy with a bottle. Next up, we have Stanislav Reshetnikov. So this guy was a Russian streamer going by the name of Reflay. He was sentenced to 6 years in a strict penal colony in 2021 for taking the life of his girlfriend, Valentina Grigorieva, live on stream while viewers paid for him to verbally and physically torment her. This all culminated in Reshetnikov locking her outside without any clothing in the freezing cold. At one point in the stream, he went out to bring her back inside when he started panicking, telling viewers that she didn't have a pulse. Now, at first, it was thought Valentina died of hypothermia, but it was soon found that she'd suffered from craniocerebral trauma. She'd been hit on the head multiple times by this sicko, and Reshetnikov's mom claimed that he, quote, wouldn't hurt a kitten and was very kind. Really grinds my gears in cases like this, when parents will say stuff like that. Like, sometimes I think they should just be thrown in prison along with them, you know? Next on the list is Bill Omar Carrasquillo, who went by the name Omi In A Hellcat on YouTube. So this guy gained fame for showcasing his lavish lifestyle. He had tons of jewelry, a nice home, and a big collection of cars, which he'd often show off on his YouTube channel. He was one of those follow me and learn to get just as rich and successful as me types of influencers. But in 2023, it was found that he'd been involved in a cable television piracy scheme. Omi In A Hellcat, along with partners Jesse Gonzalez and Michael Barron, started a business in 2016 offering discounted access to cable subscriptions, including premium channels like HBO. They purchased encoders from China to remove copyright protections from legitimate subscriptions, enabling them to stream content online at a lower cost. The service grew rapidly, reaching 100,000 subscribers and generating $34 million in revenue before being shut down in 2019. In November of 2019, the FBI raided Omi's home. His cars were seized, along with his jewelry and bank funds. He was later indicted in September of 2021 on 62 counts, including copyright infringement and wire fraud, facing a potential 514 years in federal prison. Omi eventually pleaded guilty in February of 2022. On March 8th, 2023, he was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison and fined $30 million for conspiracy, copyright infringement, fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. All his nice stuff was then auctioned off. Kind of crazy though, if you mess with the government's money, like, they will throw you in prison like that. I mean, look at that last guy. I know it was in Russia, but still, you went 6 years for like killing your girlfriend? That's nuts. Next on our list is Richard Lamar Hawk, aka Silentó. Silentó is a rapper most famous for that song Watch Me Whip, which came out 9 years ago now, which is nuts. Anyway, the music video went up on his YouTube channel and now sits at just under 2 billion views. Suffice to say, he got pretty famous. But around 2020, he started running into some problems with the law. He was arrested a few times, once for a domestic disturbance, once for entering a stranger's home, apparently looking for his girlfriend with a hatchet, and then again for reckless driving. But it was in 2021 when he was arrested for something truly disturbing. He'd taken the life of his own cousin with a firearm. He was arrested and remains in jail until a trial date is set. Next on our list, we have Austin Jones. This guy was a musician posting a cappella covers of songs on his YouTube channel, which has now been terminated because this guy is a total creep. It all started when one of his young female fans started a petition to have him removed from the upcoming lineup of Van's Warped Tour, where he was going to be performing. He'd recorded some webcam conversations that they had together. Things really blew up though when a search warrant of his home was signed off on. It was found that Jones had been persuading certain fans of his to produce adult content for him. Fans that had no place conversing, let alone making adult content at all, especially for a guy in his then mid-20s. Yeah, do the math. This guy belongs exactly where he is. In 2019, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Next on the list is Nasim Aghdam. Now, that name may not be all that familiar to you, but you may have heard of an incident in 2018 where the YouTube headquarters was attacked by a woman with a firearm. Well, that woman was Nasim Aghdam. She had a few channels on YouTube where she posted fitness videos, vegan propaganda, and catchy songs. Her content was unique. Well, in 2018, things went from unique to dark when she purchased a 9mm right around the time that she was complaining about YouTube demonetizing her videos and suppressing them so they wouldn't get views. She began hating YouTube, thinking they were actively working against her, and she ventured out to YouTube's headquarters. At the same time, her family phoned the police, not knowing where she went and being unable to contact her. Police found Nasim on April 2nd, sleeping in her car in a Walmart parking lot. They didn't think she was a threat, so she wasn't taken into custody. But then in the afternoon of April 3rd, Nasim entered the YouTube offices and began opening fire. 3 people were injured, but luckily no one died. Actually, one of the victims didn't even get injured from the firearm. She just hurt her ankle as she was running away. Police arrived at the scene to find Nasim had taken her own life. And finally, we have Ian Mcguire, who ran a YouTube channel called Hate the State. This story is very bizarre. So Ian met this elderly woman at a farmer's market, and for some reason, he started harassing and stalking her, and it went on and on. Some of his subscribers even got involved at one point. He started making all these wild claims that she was a predator and a Third Reich supporter. But things got completely out of hand when they started mailing things to this woman's address. Stuff like adult toys, fecal matter. At one point, this poor woman even received a dead cat, and she was constantly getting phone calls with threats to her and her family. This had gone on for close to 2 years. Finally though, in 2021, Ian Mcguire and one of his most active fans and co-conspirators, Bretton Osborne, were arrested, with Mcguire receiving a 5-year prison sentence. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.